right? So again, that's an optional part, and some choose not to, some choose to just focus on the performance evaluation, sometimes based on if they didn't set them in the beginning of the year as they intended and they kind of forgot about it, or if the board didn't have their own goals, it was really hard for them to set superintendent goals, those kinds of things. Then you have the third part is the evidence of performance. And I know that, Dory, you gave kind of a self-evaluation, and that evaluation that you gave me, breaking down the different elements of the performance standards and then showing evidence is great. I hope that you all found that really helpful for you. I had not seen it, that clearly outlined for a little while, so that was really impressive. I like that. It's really helpful for the board too to just be able to know what they're looking for to be able to make those ratings. So excellent. They have those artifacts to support the board's ratings. And then the fourth element, why did that not come up there? Okay, there we go. The fourth element is a targeted feedback survey. This is also optional, like the superintendent goals. We recommend if you do choose to do some sort of targeted feedback survey that you want to be intentional about it. And we also don't recommend that you do it every year. We recommend, every 2, I think, to 3 years, that can be helpful. I think the contract periods are generally 3 years, so if you're doing one in the first year and one in the final year of the contract, that's usually helpful. There's something that there are concerns sometimes with doing surveys, and if they're not targeted specifically to asking questions that get to the root of what the performance standards are that you're evaluating, then what can tend to happen is if you send these out to people, they don't really know what you're asking for. You might start getting complaints about anything and everything, and then they might not know that that's not really based on Dory's performance. It might be based on something else. So we really recommend not just targeting the questions to specifically ask very simple, get to this point about this performance standard. And if you don't know about that because you haven't had interactions with them, then hey, I don't know that. I don't have anything to contribute for that. It's really helpful for the board to narrow down that kind of information rather than trying to bring in all this different stuff and then you start to get confusion about is that a board's role or is that really the superintendent? Or the other part of our targeted feedback survey that we tend to recommend is that you narrow the performance standards down too, so you're not overwhelming them with a huge survey that takes forever and they're like, I don't really know how to answer this. So if you narrow it down to maybe top 3 of the performance standards, then you can shorten the survey and you can make sure that they're only asking on specific areas that you really want to know how the superintendent is doing. Of the 8, let's narrow it down to what criteria we're using this year for the survey. You might be evaluating on all 8, but you're only surveying people about 3. The other thing is you want to target the audience as well. You want to target it to an audience that actually would have relevant information and experience of observing Dory doing these different things, like committees, staff, definitely the superintendent's cabinet, administrative directors, teacher learning, that kind of thing. And also community partners. If you have community partner groups that Dory is heavily involved in and doing work with and collaborative projects, then you want to make sure that you're getting somebody from those organizations that's also contributing their observations of how do I think that Dory's performing in these areas, these specific performance areas. So those are the things we typically ask when we come out. We talk about it with the board and the superintendent. We say, okay, so what criteria do you want to focus on? And we have questions developed already to make sure that they're asked specifically for that. And then who would you like to send it to? You all talk together. Dory, who would be best? Who have you worked with this year? Like so much that they would have great input on the performance in these areas. And then you send it to that group rather than sending it to everybody, because then people sometimes want to just answer because they want to contribute, and then they start talking about things that aren't necessarily related to what you're observing. And
thank you for that, because I was like, oh, why don't we send it to everybody? But that makes sense.
Yeah.
We even still have some of that feedback in our small one that we sent out, and it was like, what are they doing?
Yeah, whenever we only limit the open-ended comments to very specific, and then we and we also, that's the other thing, we don't have the board read all those little things. What we do is bring it together and be like, okay, it's not just one or two people ranting about this. We bring it all together in a, combined way where it just, we talk about the themes.
Yeah,
And, like, so that makes it
it,
easier. Yeah, and it makes it easier for you to decide, okay, what's really an issue? What's rising to the top as an issue? What maybe can we think about for next year or see how it kind of, maybe because of a big change happened, that's probably why we're getting a lot of complaints about this.
So does it matter like what platform we use? Because we kind of talked about like SurveyMonkey and I don't know,
We use it.
and that's all okay to use. And
Yeah, because you can do a lot of things with it for us, how we use it. We set it up with like, anonymous, so people feel comfortable. The other reason is that you have to be really careful about who's gonna be collecting that data. And so sometimes people are reserved about what they put in if they aren't sure who's gonna be collecting the data. That's,
Right.
That thing too. But yeah, we use SurveyMonkey because you can do different settings, make sure it's anonymous, and also combines everything into those kind of reports.
That's
Figure it
right.
out.
and it's appropriate that we use our HR specialists to collect the data.
If you all agree that that's appropriate, yeah.
I thought it was the best
And
person.
then, yeah, and then we released it to Dory when we were done.
Yeah.
Because we felt that some of the info might be beneficial for her.
Yeah.
And so, and there wasn't anything bad, and just beneficial.
Yeah.
Some weird comments, that's all.
There were some weird comments. I reviewed it this afternoon.
Yeah.
Well, definitely when you're coming up with that survey, if you're going to do it yourself, then definitely like review the questions and make sure that, are we asking questions in a really like.
We like the questions. The questions originated from Dory. She put them together originally. And then we would like to kind of refine them a little bit more. This sounds weird to say, but dumb down the language.
No, it's
Because there was a few comments like that the standards are really hard for people to understand outside of this. I mean, it's even hard sometimes for us to really have to dive in what to use and all that. And so we want it in everyday language. Here's what we're looking for. Here's your options to answer, kind of thing.
the recommendation is to hire an eighth grade reading level.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Because that's the same.
Yeah.
Can I ask why you don't recommend to do target feedback surveys more than every other year or so?
Because it's difficult sometimes where, depending on what you're working on those years, if you have it back to back, and like there's survey fatigue, first of all, and you also have other fatigue, other surveys that are typically going on. Sometimes you do culture and climate surveys, you do truth surveys. So that's one of the reasons where people start to be like, what was why am I doing this? I don't really, you know what I mean? That, and also because the data, it gives you a couple years to work on things too. You can't always improve things in the first year. So you can set goals in that first year, but then it just allows some time for you to like see some difference and see some trending. So we don't typically recommend doing it every year, but some people choose to do so. It's up to the board to do it every year.
I don't know what yours is. Or just like it's
every other.
Yeah.
And
Generally, that's,
we're doing the students survey, the parents
Yeah.
survey, the teacher, this is and twice a year, spring, fall.
yeah, and that is,
That's
and the superintendent survey should be held in like the end of fall, winter, if you want to get the stuff in time. for it.
December. Yeah.
Yeah, so we recommend starting in October, sending it out in November, have the result by December so that you can,
Okay.
We can review by February.
Yes, exactly.
We have more people hired than we have in the past, though.
Last time it was more targeted. It was specific groups of people, union leaders.
We do
a couple of
recommend that.
community People, a couple people that I knew would be blatantly honest. Not all the yes people.
That's the other reason why I think depending on when your collective bargaining is going on and stuff like that too, sometimes every other year is best because you don't have it every year.
Player tenders.
Before we negotiate.
Which can misuse data, it really can, so.
We want people to see actions on the surveys, otherwise they just won't fill them out.
This is true.
Kind of like, I do this every year, it's always the same questions, and I never see
And
change.
that's also the important part about when you're finishing this process, that you're talking about that in the closed session. We are saying that, I give the final like summary of, we completed the evaluation based on feedback, we set superintendent goals for the following year, so that people can hear in the public session that, okay, what I said made a difference. They're actually doing something about it. it's really good to make sure that at the end of the whole process, you're saying, okay, we've completed this, and these are the things we've learned. What you can't share, you know what I mean?
Right.
But some things on a high level you can share, and then that way people are informed, and they know that it's been done, the board's doing their work. This is what we feel as far as Dory's work, and these are the areas that we're gonna focus on this year. And then you're setting up the criteria, the timeline for the next year's cycle. You're also saying, okay, these are the goals we're establishing for this year. We're gonna still look at these new performance standards, but everybody's informed, and everyone knows what you're doing, and it's very transparent.
And what you're saying, like, with what you can share, like, staffing stuff you can't share, like, HR, so,
And same thing for Dory. There's certain things that, you know, if there's areas of growth that you talk about that it's not necessarily performance, it's very specific, then that's kept in, you know, session. That's not something that comes out. And then the final part is that public evaluation survey. So you have your meeting, you talk about the board's feedback or individual feedback and ratings, you talk about the survey results that you had on that year, you have the self-evaluation that Dory's probably already presented, you have all of this material so that you can sit down and be like, okay, can we all agree on this rating? If you give a 4, you give a 3, you give a 3, do we all agree? Is it a 3, you know? And you kind of come up with that, and then what are the strengths? What are the areas of growth that we'd all like to see? And then put it together so it's one board. Everybody has their opportunity to kind of share, and then you have one document that you present to Dory and say, okay, this is your evaluation. And then give Dory some time too to ask clarifying questions with the board in the room. Be like, I don't understand why this is in here. Could you please tell me a little bit more about that? Why this is in here? Why are you rating it this way? Have those conversations. Then, when that's done, and maybe you need to make some changes after you have that conversation to the final document that's going to go in, you know, your file, then that's when you let her sit for a week or two with that, and you're like, okay, these are the areas, this is feedback. Come back to us, and we'll have a work session to talk about superintendent goals in next year's cycle. All right. So really, we just kind of talked about that timeline. If you want to talk about timeline, if you're trying to be done by March 15th, then you're going to have that adopt the evaluation process and tool right after that. You're going to talk about next year's right after that. So you're looking at April, May, you want to be starting to talk about what evaluation process, what tools, are we going to do a survey? Are we going to have superintendent goals? When are we going to have check-ins? How many are we going to have? Have those conversations with the board of superintendents together. Yes.
oh, okay, so you've not done like in a board meeting?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep, in a public meeting, you have that conversation amongst all of you, and you then you decide when check-ins are going to be, and you come up with a timeline. Okay, this is when we expect that we're going to have a check-in. This is when we're going to have the survey if we're having it. This is when we're going to have the self-evaluation presented to us. This is the meeting that we're going to come together in executive session, and we're going to talk through. This is when board member individual feedback is due, so that everybody knows when their part needs to be done. You said that in April, May, you know, before the new school year starts, and then also because you just finished in March with that evaluation, that's going to inform that setting and goals. So between April, May, you know, getting into June, you want to have those things established before the new school year starts. I say April, May because June's busy, end of year, graduation, all those things. So it's a good timing. And then, so then you set up those quarterly evaluative check-ins. Some people say quarterly is too much. So if you're not going to do quarterly, at least have like a mid-year point where you kind of come in and be like, okay, give us a half of the year self-evaluation on all these elements and give us some artifacts, evidence. Some people incorporate it into strategic goals on their agendas, and they say, hey, if this is a goal that we've set, or this is something that we're asking of you, when you present that to the board, you give information about it, you know, hey, this is for superintendent goal number 1, that kind of thing. So that people, when you're hearing about it, and you're learning the data, and you're reading about it, that you can make that association. And you can also say, okay, yeah, we had that at this meeting. I'm going to go back and I'm going to look the minutes if I need to. And then if you are going to do a targeted feedback survey, as I said, you want to try and start thinking about getting that started, get the questions ready, practice, and send that out in October, November. Have everything at least back by January. Sometimes people go over the break, you know, for people to fill things out. But you want to at least have that December, January, so that you can start in January and February and have conversations. And then you'll be able to give your formal summative evaluation before that March 13th deadline. 15th if we're changing it. I'm sure you're very familiar with the standards, state standards. I don't know that we necessarily need to go over them again, but I do have that in here. I'm going to be giving you all the slides from all of these states so you can have something you can refer back to just to have those. It's also in the workbook in a little bit more detail. It's just really important that you remember while you're looking at these different performance standards that you're not rating tasks, you're rating their performance across those areas. And that's one of the reasons why I developed this, and hopefully it's very tiny, but you'll be able to see this later. So I kind of wanted to break down, it says in there that 4 is accomplished, 3 is effective, 2 is developing, 1 is ineffective. You know, what does that look like in practice? And what evidence typically shows what that looks like in practice? And then I also added, what questions can the board ask in order to make sure and make that decision as to whether you want to go to 3 or to 4? And you can have these kind of conversations and ask these questions as you're having that review of the survey data and you're looking at the self-evaluation and the evidence that you have received. Because really, like, if you think about it, boards should be using ratings for like patterns of evidence, consistency over time, and also the impact, not just isolated examples. You really want to be looking over time throughout the whole year. So like a rating of 3 is not average. It really means that the superintendent is meeting expectations consistently and that it's solid and effective performance. But if you're going to move that up to a 4, then a 4 should really be used when there's that clear, consistent evidence of impact beyond your expectations and not just strong effort or activity. So you want to kind of ask these questions. You want to look at the evidence and see if that, if you're really making the best choice as far as ratings. So I know sometimes it's hard. People are like, well, I don't know the difference between 3 or 4. I know the difference between 2 or 3. So I hope that that kind of helps a little bit more than the few sentences that are in the workbook that you might be able to look at as before you go into the next one.
This would be nice to print.
I was gonna say, what the this is for her for us.
I can put it into a document instead of just on the slide. That'd be awesome. So
We did have lots of questions about everything.
Many do.
Well, I definitely feel like we focused a little more on some things. We focused a little bit on specific tasks versus an overall.
Yep.
Or overall accomplishment.
And that tends to be what happens. Because it's hard to do otherwise sometimes. So looking at, Dory did provide what feedback we have from this round therapy, and it looks like the actual data from recent evaluation is mostly effective, number 3. And so that means that, you know, the evidence is showing that the systems are in place. You have this care team, the data use and partnerships, there's strong alignment to the priorities, but there's still ongoing development of work. It's not fully embedded yet. So that seems appropriate for some of those ratings in those areas. It's exactly what effective should look like. The systems are in place, they're moving forward, with some areas still developing towards a deeper impact. So looking at this rubric, what I'd like you to think about is not only what you're rating currently for this year, but maybe think about what would need to happen or need to be true for the standard to elevate to 4 next year. And that really helps you to kind of think about what direction you can give in the superintendent goals and such like that. Be like, okay, we really want to move this from 3 to 4 in this area because this is really important to us. So what would need to be true and what would need to happen here and shared? What would you need to be doing in order to elevate that? And that's really the kind of feedback they're looking for. It's great to say where you're at, but how do I get better? Because we're always striving for the best, right?
Well, and I appreciate that level of focus. As I said, it is so broad and it's really valuable to hear from the board. Where do you want me to really focus my efforts?
Yes.
For that improvement piece, or what do you see or hear as needs within the district, with our student achievement, you know, all of that as a focus area. And then a couple of goals within that focus area breakdown is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that you want to really bring the focus and be clear and and set reasonable, SMART goals, things that can be measured, things that can be achieved within this amount of time, because, strategic plans are 5 years. So you gotta break that down. We're getting here, but we can't do that in 1 year. We've given ourselves 5 years, we should give this some time too. So yeah, that just really, I think if you're considering, what, you're setting the superintendents for next year, if you're asking those questions, and then you're kind of saying, okay, what would I want to see that moves us to the next level? What would make me give you a 4 in this area next year? Those are the things you want to be thinking about to give direction for next year. I don't know why that's blank. Oh, yeah, now I know why it's blank, because it's an animation that I didn't put in properly. So I wanted to talk briefly about the difference between district goals and superintendent goals, because often this is an area that boards are like, I don't know the difference. And sometimes they take district goals and they expect the superintendent to meet those district goals in a year, and that's not what we're looking at. So superintendent goals are optional, but they are highly valuable. They're developed collaboratively in that open session. Like I said, you focus on areas of growth that were identified during this last evaluation. They're not the same as district goals, which are visionary. They're tied to the strategic plan or continuous improvement plan. The goals for superintendent goals, you want them to support the superintendent's continued development, and also that they may align with district goals so that you're all working in the same direction, but they're really distinct and they're performance-based. So it's best to set them after that evaluation concludes. Sometimes it's helpful, to have a facilitator kind of talk about those goal settings. Sometimes we do offer that service, but you want to take some time and you want to make sure that you're well established with, okay, this is our long-term strategic goal. This is the board's goal for this year. This is what the superintendent has come to us and we've discussed about the superintendent's goal. How did they align? Does everything align? Start asking those questions. Is everything kind of moving in the same direction? So yeah, district goals equal system direction and superintendent goals equal performance focus. And that's really, should come from the evaluation results. And I don't know why the rest of us didn't. As I said, I didn't do very good with this animations. Is there any questions on that distinction or clarification?
You said the superintendent goals were performance focused and the district goals.
The districts are visionary and they're directional and they're based on your strategic plan or continuous improvement plan. So your long-term goals. Okay.
Maybe Samantha, do you remember when we went to Estacada? I think there was one of the sessions with the superintendent of Estacada, because they were like, at the time, 5, 6, 7 years working with Studer. And I think a percentage or a couple of the superintendent goals were directly connected to the annual goals or the strategic plan for Estacada. I mean, they specifically mentioned the superintendent goals. I thought that was interesting, how it was connected to the district, because on our strategic plan, we have our pillars, and I like basically a goal within each of those 3 pillars. So one of them being to pass them on. That's important. So.
And I just did some of the similar work with another who just did their strategic plan for them.
Okay.
So what they did is we did this whole exercise. We took a few hours during the work session. We talked about what the goals were. And then they hadn't even set their board goals based on the strategic plan. So we said, okay, what are your board goals? What are the things you want to see that are going to be working towards these different pillars? What could be potentially superintendent goals based on you just did the evaluation? And then what they did is they kind of looked at like, oh, let's circle this. This is the same thing as kind of over here. Okay, maybe we should all be working in the same direction. So they just kind of made sure that they were all aligned. They weren't necessarily the same thing and in the same areas, but sometimes they do connect onto pillars because it makes it easy for everyone to be like, okay, you're already reporting on the strategic plan process. But we just need to be distinct about like what's going to be used during the evaluation is different than, what the board is working towards. Okay.
What's the timeline? When do boards typically set their goals?
It varies.
Okay.
It depends on when they conclude their original strategic plan work. Sometimes if they're doing self-assessment, if they have those plans, sometimes they'll set those goals after that. Definitely, I think more often I see them in the July, August area during retreats. So we have the summertime to have those like long work sessions where everyone kind of talks about what are we gonna do this year, and that's generally when I see them being set. Once you get that like major organizational July meeting, all those, logistics done, then you can kind of sit back and talk about, okay, before the students come into the building, what are we gonna do? What's our focus this year? And if you haven't, but sometimes if you haven't set superintendent goals before, sometimes you might want to do that work at the same time. So like when we get to talking about next year's timeline, criteria, tools, if you want to set superintendent goals after this evaluation cycle, sometimes maybe the board needs to talk first about like what are our priorities for this year based on our strategic plan and our pillars. So it can be done simultaneously. I would say anytime between the end of the evaluation and the beginning of the new school year, July, or okay. And finally, I just want to touch on that idea of why confidentiality matters, why we allow these discussions to happen, some of them to happen, not the criteria, the timeline, and setting the cycle and things like that, but those actual discussions with the superintendent's evaluation of their performance. They're held in executive session. I mean, there are some superintendents who ask for it to be public. So they have to be given the opportunity that, hey, this is coming up, would you like it to be in public? Within 24 hours notice, that you have to at least do that. But really the reason why we have these in executive session is just to kind of protect that superintendent relationship with the rest of their staff and, the community as well. So it's a discussion that happens between the supervisor and employee. And the board is the supervisor and employees are employee. So you just want to make sure that you're really being really good about that, and that you're not going home and talking to anybody. And I know that we all know what this is, but there's a really strong reason to build that trust and to make sure that Dora feels protected when we're having these conversations that can be difficult sometimes if it is an area that you really want to work on. I'm not saying that that's necessarily true, but when it does happen, if there is something that happens, then we'll be able to have that safe space where you're protecting each other as well. So just protects the trust and dignity. If breaking confidentiality will damage relationships, and sometimes that's irreparable. And as you said, really our focus is having long-term, leadership consistency. So we want to make sure we're.
It's the same reason we've had our board secretary not in those meetings lately. We used to, and I just felt for Dory, she didn't ask them to, we asked, and Jen's never done anything wrong, our board secretary, but we just felt it was better to do it just with Dory.
And a lot of boards are making that decision. I was a board secretary forever, and I was always included. And like, it is the most awkward place to
I'm
be.
sure it is.
Because you can't unhear things,
Right.
unknown things that you just like, I shouldn't know that about this.
Yeah, and I just look at how connected our little school is with on each other. I mean, spouses and all the things. And I don't want to burden her with information. Why open the problem if you don't have to? And I don't think Jen ever would, but I'm just saying, if we don't need her, she can take it out.
As long as somebody can take over, on the board and take over the things that need to be done and need to be documented, then that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think it's better. Yeah, especially, and that's good. As you said, with small towns, it's difficult where some people sometimes there could be relations, So.
I think the thought didn't cross my mind until our board secretary became the mayor of the city. And I was like, not the current one, the last one. I was like, wait, we want the mayor of our city in all of our meetings.
And I was just going to kind of talk about, why this where it breaks down and what risks, because we kind of have talked about that. So I'm comfortable with that. So I want to talk to you really quickly about a couple of opportunities, because we did just talk about this. And actually this preparation for tonight is really going to help you, because on April 20th, I'm giving you an executive evaluation webinar for OSBA. So that will be recorded. We'll probably be covering a lot of the things that we talked about here, but sometimes it's nice to be on the webinar and listen to other questions that come up and other ideas that come come up. So if you want to come here, Ricky, it's available, but also maybe ask some questions and bring some of the conversation up from today into that discussion. You're welcome to do so. There should be, I think there already was some newsletters and stuff that went out with the registration link and such like that. I also want to make sure that you're aware of our upcoming summer board conference. It's no longer going to be summer board conference. We're breaking it up and we're on the road. This year we're going to Redmond and Eugene, and ideally, I think each summer we're going to try and get some different areas that we go to. So if you're able to attend either one of these sessions, it will be a one-day session similar to the material that's normally covered under a summer board. But I just want to make sure you're aware of that. And then we'll also, of course, have our annual convention in Portland. So before we close, I just want you to think about next steps regarding the superintendent evaluation and maybe talk about what is one thing that you want to strengthen in your evaluation process. Based on what you just did.
I would say goals. Coming up with goals would be good.
Superintendent?
Superintendent goals. Dory's personality would probably appreciate that. Just knowing how you are.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a board work session specifically for superintendent goals and board goals, like what was mentioned, would be good.
Where could there be more clarity or structure to your process, do you think?
The timeline.
Yeah, the timeline. Yeah. I think also I would love a printout of your grade, because I think that would be helpful in the rubric, just because I know 3 of us were new to it this year. And
Yeah.
decipher how we wanted to.
I was surprised at how we all interpreted the performance standards differently.
Yeah.
Like they're very, to me, they seem very much like they overlap a ton. They all, and I almost used Dory's feedback from her self-evaluation to go, okay, this is how she's viewing it, to try to and you know, like we could have, you know, someone could give a 4 and someone could give a 2, and then it just gets balanced out if we interpret them differently. Like they almost seem like they need to be condensed a little bit, a little clearer.
Okay. And I'm gonna kind of try to include some of these things in like the summary I'm gonna give from all 3 sessions so that you can have these kinds of things that you wanted to talk about. That's just how the recording stuff.
Well, and I wonder, would it be appropriate to have a work session with Dory to go over the standards and kind of fine tune them so they're more specific to us? So that we all agree what we're looking at.
Yeah.
I think that would be part of that criteria.
Yeah.
I think that would be part of the criteria conversation when we talk about next year's cycle, that everyone's on the same page, looking at the self-evaluation, kind of what you were looking at, and then talking about what maybe how moving forward, without getting into details, but like, this is what I see as.
Falling in this category, yeah.
But I like that idea. And then also marrying that with the rubric at the same time in the work session. So when you came up with the standards and the rubric all together, we could collectively come up with that
Yeah,
decision.
and it could go in our binders and be our shared one.
Okay, so you mentioned needing clarity on your timelines. Do you currently have quarterly check-ins? Do you have kind of a mid-year, like one of those check-ins, like, okay, before we're halfway through, do we need to adjust? Like, we set this as the goal, but this is what we're seeing. Do we need to adjust before the end of the year? Do you have time for that, where you're kind of presenting
that in mind.
Okay. Just things to consider. It may not work for you, but if you're doing a quarterly check-in.
Yeah, I think the quarterly check-ins are adequate enough. Even every once in a while, we have one that there's not really much going on. Yeah, but we do them.
Okay. And consistently, yes.
Yes.
I have found the timeline challenging
Okay.
because coming from the education side and being a teacher and a director, my evaluation was always June, and I start over in July. To wrap my brain around, okay, I just got my evaluation, now I've got to start the cycle over, but I'm trying to close out the school year. And July is my time. I come in, it's quiet, I can work on things, I can really focus. So I just have really struggled with that. It's hard for me to get to goals until I really get to June. but I can come up with some draft ones, especially tied to our strategic plan.
But I think we could do goals in somewhere in June.
Yeah, you should
Okay.
absolutely decide to do that.
Yeah, and our goals usually like a couple of years, because then that would make sense with the year goals.
No, so usually when we're talking about superintendent goals.
Yeah.
They're 1 year, one cycle.
One
So
cycle.
when you get this evaluation, you take the feedback from this evaluation, the areas of growth and things you want to concentrate on. You talk about what you want to focus on for the next year's cycle before we get back to it. And so really the reason why we say set it around that time is because you can start to implement some of those things before the end of the school year. But you're also bringing in, because then by the time you get to December, like there's a whole January, February, March that you're not gonna have any data, you're not gonna have anything before the next evaluation. So really, if you set them now, you are kind of overlapping 2 school years.
Yeah.
And consider that when you're making those goals, that it may be, you know, you might not be able to fully focus on this one until later, but maybe I can start to implement some things now that will carry over into the next year.
You said, you know, 1 or 2, but definitely no more than 3. Maybe we start with just 1.
Honestly,
That would be
You
good.
know, like get our legs under us, and, yeah, keep it focused.
I think if it's a really strong focus, I think that's the best way to go, for sure. And yeah, and just making sure too that if there's any, like alignment, just making sure that everything aligns to pillars and like what you're working on, as you said, that you might want to develop them at the same time. So I think a work session to kind of have these conversations is the best next step. So, any other questions or reflections before we close out?
I think the most interesting thing for me, maybe not everyone in the room, when we did our last executive session, was coming out of it and realizing the self-reflection piece. We need to actually do this part better. In all the evaluations I've sat through before, we've never sat down and made a list of things like, oh, we need a work session on that so that we can support Dory better. So I don't know where that came from, but it felt great to sit there and go, oh no, we have to do better here, here, and here in order for her to do better there. And we acknowledge that within it. And so
I love to hear that. And that's kind of something we talked about earlier, those tools for collaboration, that board self-assessment. Sometimes before you can evaluate them, let's talk about what
Right.
our areas too.
what are
Because-
we doing right?
Yeah. And that's why we have the board standards, those 12 standards of like, okay, maybe we can work on this year on community engagement. You know what I mean? Like that's where we really want to grow
What
this
does it
year.
look like? Yeah.
So maybe based on our evaluation, there might be a goal that kind of interconnects with what you want to do and, you know, where you want to focus for that year, and like passing along.
Yeah, for sure.
I like to hear that. That's great.
I was gonna ask if you could give an example of like a district goal versus a superintendent goal. Cause I know on the spot, doesn't bring like.
Yeah, I actually do have some. I have arrested. Let me close that. 1 second. Hopefully I can find it really quickly.
Okay, just bring over that, you can't see it from there. So one of our district goals is create a culture where students feel safe and welcome. That's a 5-year strategic plan goal. Another one is increase the number of students who are on grade level. Another one is improve our facilities. We had a couple. We had facilities and successful students and invested and connected community. Within invested students, build pride in our community. Oh, and invested employees. Build pride in our community and our facilities so that Sheridan School District is a great place to send your students. Build community support through transparency, communication, and engagement. So if we're gonna have a 5-year goal of build community support through transparency, communication, engagement, the board might have a goal around community engagement, and then I might have a goal around transparency. And there's a whole bunch I can tell you coming down about budget transparency that can make your head spin. So is that on the right track? I mean, I can't see it cascading.
And I'll give you another example. So a district goal, what it might look like is 100% on-time graduation for all students. A superintendent goal might be develop and implement a district-wide early intervention system to improve on-time graduation rates across all student groups. A board goal might be ensure that the district budget priorities and the accountability measures are aligned to support that on-time graduation. So you see how they all kind of talk about the same thing, but they're different focuses as far as, what that strategic
They
pillar.
all support each other.
Yes, and then there's another one, like academic success for all. That's your strategic priority, and your district goal for that strategic priority is to increase proficiency and close achievement gaps. So the superintendent's goal might be to implement a district-wide literacy assessment plan. The board goal might be to monitor academic progress quarterly and align the budget decisions with that. Okay. I will.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I know where you're going.
That next work session would be great to have all that right there for us.
All right.
And then no, because so in the superintendent goal, this will come out of the evaluation or no?
Yes, the superintendent goal will come out of the evaluation and feedback that you've given them in the areas that they want to improve on or work on for the next year, but also aligned with what you want.
That's why I'm like.
I know.
But it would be cool that Dory kind of instructs based on what she knows she can control, right? Like, 'cause we don't want to pick something that has 10 different avenues. And
Which is important for the board to have your goals established first, because then she can say, here's my feedback. I know this is a priority and this is a goal of the district this year, so I'm gonna make sure that my goal, aligns with that.
Okay.
But also addresses the performance.
This year, what
But it seems like I'm hearing two different things. The superintendent goal may be focused on the evaluation in an area of like one of the standards to improve, and a superintendent goal may be connected to the board goal.
So yours is performance-based. You want to talk about what your performance is, and that's what your goal is based on, okay? The board's is directional-based. So your goal is a direction. Yours is performance-based, what you're going to do and how you're going to perform in order to make sure that you're aligned with what their primary goals are.
So I'm like,
So it's not a goal that, okay, this is what a board would look like. We would really like you to get to this area.
No, but but having those conversations and asking those questions could help to develop that goal based on what they want. You know what I mean?
Okay, so it's-
Yes.
Does that make sense?
I'll give you the example, but this is why I said you kind of have to have an exercise.
Yeah.
Then I can kind of give you an activity that, I also did, and that might be, private too. I'll try and give you as much as I can. Strategic goals.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that we all just agree, so that way make sure that we all understand each other, so that you're not shooting at something that we don't
Yes.
yet. So like, there's no, like set in stone
Right.
school board, organization rules that say to follow. It's how it works for us, right?
Yeah, when you're talking about alignment, like the goals are the same, like you're working on different things, but you want to make sure that you're working on different things moving in the same direction. So I'll give you as much as I can.
We all like, okay.
And if you need some help too, we do that a lot too, where we kind of come through and work through those activities to get there. So,
I think once we get going, that will.
Yeah.
It'll start.
for sure.
We'll say that best. And Dory's goal is to make sure we get a new board.
Okay.
This is her best. She gets us to new board.
All right, I think that is everything. I'm trying to get back to my screen and it's not letting me go back there. But anyway, there we go. Since we've done all three of these together, we'd love to hear your feedback if this was beneficial to you. If there's things that we can improve, if there's more information or things that we can have, we'd love to hear your feedback. We're always trying to improve this board governance essentials. You guys, it was great breaking it up. Normally we do this in 3 hours in one night. Honestly, this was the best because you can actually have this conversation about each different area. So I hope you liked it. I really liked it this way. It's not typically what we get to do because we don't often get to be as close to traveling.
I initially was thinking that this would have been so much more better to be at the beginning of our session prior to but I think the fact that the evaluation and all of its weirdness for all of us new members was so fresh in my mind that having it on the heels is actually really nice. I think it's gonna help those in the better direction next year. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was actually, in my eyes, like, this was great. It's really good because of this fact that you were saying, we were able to actually come together and figure out some things that we need work sessions on.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. I
it
felt
was
good coming out.
naturally just happening. in conversations.
Good, that's what we want here, conversation. Good. Well, thank you all, it's been a pleasure, and I hope you got a lot of information. I will be forwarding everything you've learned, a little bit of a summary, and kind of the notes that I've been talking, so if you have something, I'll get you as many materials, but if I don't send something or I forgot to send something, please just let me know. And if there's something else that you come up with as you're going through the process and you're having your work sessions, you know, we might have something that's already been developed that we can shoot over to you that we just didn't think about. So always be in contact, let me know what you're working on and I can help you. Okay? Thank you.
All right, well, it's 7:11 and that's the end of our work session.